Welcome Shemstars to the computer class. In our previous class we started new chapter Society, Law and Ethics. Today we will continue with this chapter and study Open Source Philosophy. So let's start with Open Source Philosophy and Software Licensing. Broadly, the term open source software is used to refer to those categories of software or programs whose license do not impose much conditions. Such softwares generally give users freedom to run or use the software for any purpose, to study and modify the program, and to redistribute copies of either the original or modified programs. There are many categories of software that may be referred to as open source software. Following subsection is going to talk about the same. So let's talk about the terminologies. Before we talk about various terms and definitions pertaining to open world, you must be clear about two terms which are most misunderstood or misinterpreted. These terms are free softwares and open source softwares. So let's first explain what is free software. It means the software is freely accessible and can be freely used, changed, improved, copied and distributed by all who wish to do so, and no payment are needed to be made for free software. Next is open source software. It can be freely used in terms of making modification, constructing business models around the software and so on. But it does not have to be free of charge. Here the company constructing the business model around open source software may receive payments concerning support, further development. What is important to know here is that open source software, the source code is freely available to the customer. Now, what is the philosophy of open source? Open source software is officially defined by open source definition at, I'm giving you address here. It is http www.opensource.org docs definition plain.html. It states that open source doesn't just mean access to the source code. The distribution terms of open source software must comply with the following criteria. Free distribution, no restriction on the redistribution of software whether as a whole or a part. Source code, the part or the program must include source code and must allow distribution in source code as well as compiled form. Derived works, the license must allow modification and derived work and must allow them to be distributed under the same terms as the license of the original software. Integrity of author's source code, the integrity of author's source code must be maintained. Any addition or modification should carry a different name or version number from the original software. No discrimination against person or group. The license must not discriminate against any person or group of persons. No discrimination against field of endeavor. The license must not restrict anyone from making use of the program in a specific field of endeavor. For example, it may not restrict the program for being used in a business or from being used for genetic research. Distribution of license. The right attached to a program must apply to whole to the program of distribution. License must not be specific to a product. License must not restrict other softwares. License must be technology neutral. So software which is free as well as open belongs to the category of FOSS, that is free and open source software. So definition is, after understanding the difference between the terms free and open, let us now proceed with discussion on terminology and definition pertaining to open source software. OSS and flaws. OSS refers to open source software, which refers to software whose source code is available to customer and it can be modified and redistributed without any limitation. And OSS may come free of cost or may be a payment of nominal charges that the developer may charge in the name of development support of software. On the other hand, flaws refers to free, liberal and open source software. The term flaws is used to refer to a software which is both free software as well as open source software. Next is GNU. GNU refers to GNUs, not Unix. GNU project emphasizes on freedom. The GNU project was initiated by Richard with an objective to create an operating system. With time, GNU project expanded and now it is not limited to only an operating system. Now it offers a wide range of software including application apart from operating system. Next is FSF. It is Free Source Foundation. It is a non-profit organization created for the purpose of supporting free software movement. Richard founded FSF in 1985 to support GNU project and GNU licenses. Next is OSI, that is Open Source Initiative. It is an organization dedicated to cause of promoting open source software. Bruce and Eric were founder of OSI in February 1998. OSI specifies the criteria for open source software and properly defines the term. Open source doesn't just mean access to source code. The distribution term of open source software must comply with open source definition by OSI. Next, we are going to talk about freeware. It is generally used for software which is available free of cost and which allow copying and further distribution but not modification and whose source code is not available. Freeware should not be mistaken for open source software or for free software. Freeware is distributed in binary form without any license fee. In some instances, the right to use the software is limited to certain type of users, for instance, for private and non-commercial purposes. One example is Microsoft Internet Explorer, which is made available as freeware. Next term is W3C, that is World Wide Web Consortium. It is responsible for producing the software standards for World Wide Web. It was created in October 1994 to lead the World Wide Web to its full potential by developing common protocols that promote the evolution and ensure its interoperability. Next term is proprietary software. It is the software that is neither open nor freely available. Its use is regulated and further distributed and modification is either prohibited or forbidden. Next is shareware. It is a software which is made available with the right to distribute copies, but it is stipulated that if one intends to use the software, often after a certain period of time, then a license fee should be paid. Next is copylefted software. It is free software whose distribution terms ensure that all copies of all versions carry more or less the same distribution terms. This means, for instance, that copyleft licenses generally disallow others to add additional requirements to the software and require making source code available. They shield the program and its modification or modified version from some of the common ways of making a program proprietary. So, licenses and domain of open source technology. As per open source initiative, open source licenses are licenses that comply with open source definition. In brief, they allow software to be freely used, modified, and shared. Broadly used open source licenses are being given below for your references. First is GNU General Public License. It is probably one of the most commonly used license for open source project. The GPL grants and guarantees a wide range of rights to developers who work on open source projects. Basically, it allows user to legally copy, distribute and modify softwares. Next is GNU Lesser General Public License, that is LGPL. There is this is another one. It offers lesser rights to a work than the standard GPL license. The LGPL is used to license free software so that it can be incorporated with both free and proprietary software. Next is BSD license. It represents a family of permissive free software license that have fewer restrictions on distributed compared to other free software license such as GNU. There are two important versions of BSD. One is the new BSD license or modified BSD license, and then second one is the simplified BSD license or free BSD license. Next is MIT. MIT license is the shortest and probably broadest of all the popular open source license. Its terms are very loose and more permissive than most other licenses. Next is Apache license, and it grants a number of rights to users. These rights can be applied to both copyright and patents. So today we were able to understand open source softwares. Tomorrow we will study privacy, cybercrime and computer forensics. Thank you, Shimstars. That's all for today. You can drop your queries on the Google Classroom. Take care.